The Ancient City. A study on the religion, laws, and institutions of Greece and Rome.
Numa Denis Fustel De Coulanges.
Book 3rd, The City. Chapter 2, New Religious Beliefs. First. The gods of physical nature.
Before passing from the formation of tribes to the establishment of cities, we must mention an important element in the intellectual life of those ancient peoples. When we sought the most ancient beliefs of these men, we found a religion which had their dead ancestors for its object, and for its principal symbol the sacred fire. It was this religion that founded the family and established the first laws, but this race has also had in all its branches another religion, the one whose principal figures were Zeus, here, Athene, Juno, that of the Hellenic Olympus, and of the Roman capital. Of these two religions, the first found its gods in the human soul, the second took them from physical nature. As the sentiment of living power, and of conscience, which he felt in himself, inspired man with the first idea of the divine, so the view of this immensity, which surrounded and overwhelmed him, traced out for his religious sentiment another course. Man, in the early ages, was continually in the presence of nature. The habits of civilized life did not yet draw a line between it and him. His sight was charmed by its beauties, or dazzled by the grandeur. He enjoyed the light, he was terrified by the night, and when he saw the holy light of heaven return, he experienced a feeling of thankfulness. His life was in the hands of nature, he looked for the beneficent cloud on which his harvest depended, he feared the storm which might destroy the labor and hope of all the year. At every moment he felt his own feebleness and the incomparable power of what surrounded him. He experienced perpetually a mingled feeling of veneration, love, and terror for this power of nature. This sentiment did not conduct him at once to the conception of an only God ruling the universe, for as yet he had no idea of the universe. He knew not that the earth, the sun, and the stars are parts of one same body. The thought did not occur to him that they might all be ruled by the same being. On first looking upon the external world, man pictured it to himself as a sort of confused republic, where rival forces made war upon each other. As he judged external objects from himself and felt in himself a free person, he saw also in every part of creation, in the soil, in the tree, in the cloud, in the water of the river, in the sun, so many persons like himself. He endued them with thought, volition, and choice of acts. As he thought them powerful, and was subject to their empire, he avowed his dependence, he invoked them, and adored them, he made gods of them. Thus in this race the religious idea presented itself under two different forms. On the one hand, man attached the divine attribute to the invisible principle, to the intelligence, to what he perceived of the soul, to what of the sacred he felt in himself. On the other hand, he applied his ideas of the divine to the external object which he saw, which he loved or feared, to physical agents that were the masters of his happiness and of his life. These two orders of belief laid the foundation of two religions that lasted as long as Greek and Roman society. They did not make war upon each other, they even lived on very good terms, and shared the empire over man, but they never became confounded. Their dogmas were always entirely distinct, often contradictory, and their ceremonies and practices were absolutely different. The worship of the gods of Olympus and that of Heroes and Munes never had anything common between them. Which of these two religions was the earlier in date no one can tell. It is certain, however, that one, that of the dead, having been fixed at a very early epoch, always remained unchangeable in its practices, while its dogmas faded away little by little. The other, that of physical nature, was more progressive, and developed freely from age to age, modifying its legends and doctrines by degrees, and continually augmenting its authority over men.
Second. Relation of this religion to the development of human society.
We can easily believe that the first rudiments of this religion of nature are very ancient, though not so old, perhaps, as the worship of ancestors. But as it corresponded with more general and higher conceptions, it required more time to become fixed into a precise doctrine. It is quite certain that it was not brought into the world in a day, and that it did not spring in full perfection from the brain of man. We find at the origin of this religion neither a prophet nor a body of priests. It grew up in different minds by an effort of their natural powers. Each man created it for himself in his own fashion. Among all these gods, sprung from different minds, there were resemblances, because ideas were formed in the minds of men after a nearly uniform manner. But there was also a great variety, because each mind was the author of its own gods. Hence it was that for a long time this religion was confused, and that its gods were innumerable. Still the elements which could be deified were not very numerous. The sun which gives fecundity, the earth which nourishes, the clouds, by turns beneficent and destructive, such were the different powers of which they could make gods. But from each one of these elements thousands of gods were created, because the same physical agent, viewed under different aspects, received from men different names. The sun, for example, was called in one place Hercules, the glorious, in another, Phoebus, the shining, and still again Apollo, he who drives away night or evil. One called him Hyperion, the elevated being, another, Alexikakos, the beneficent, and in the course of time groups of men, who had given these various names to the brilliant luminary, no longer saw that they had the same God. Indeed, each man adored but a very small number of divinities, but the gods of one were not those of another. The names, it is true, might resemble each other. Many men might separately have given their god the name of Apollo, or of Hercules. These words belonged to the common language, and were merely adjectives, and designated the divine being by one or another of his most prominent attributes. But under this same name the different groups of men could not believe that there was but one God. They counted thousands of different Jupiters, they had a multitude of Minervas, Dianas, and Junos, who resembled each other very little. Each of these conceptions was formed by the free operation of each mind, and being in some sort its property, it happened that these gods were for a long time independent of each other, and that each one of them had his particular legend in his worship. As the first appearance of these beliefs was at a time when men still lived under family government, these new gods had at first, like the demons, the heroes, and the lares, the character of domestic divinities. Each family made gods for itself, and each kept them for itself, as protectors, whose good offices it did not wish to share with strangers. This thought appears frequently in the hymns of the Vedas, and there is no doubt that it was the same in the minds of the Aryas of the West, for there are visible traces of it in their religion. As soon as a family, by personifying a physical agent, had created a god, it associated him with its sacred fire, counted him among its penates, and added a few words for him in its formula of prayer. This explains why we often meet among the ancients with expressions like this.
The gods who sit near my hearth, the Jupiter of my hearth, the Apollo of my fathers.
I conjure you,
said Tecmessa to Ajax.
in the name of the Jupiter who sits near your hearth.
Medea, the enchantress, says, in Euripides.
I swear by Hecate, my protecting goddess, whom I venerate, and who inhabits this sanctuary of my hearth.
When Virgil describes what is oldest in the religion of Rome, he shows Hercules associated with the sacred fire of Evander, and adored by him as a domestic divinity. Hence came those thousands of forms of local worship among which no unity could ever be established. Hence those contests of the gods of which polytheism is full, and which represent struggles of families, cantons, or villages. Hence, too, that innumerable multitude of gods and goddesses of whom assuredly we know but the smallest part, for many have perished without even having left their names, simply because the families who adored them became extinct, or the cities that had adopted them were destroyed. It must have been a long time before these gods left the bosom of the families with whom they had originated and who regarded them as their patrimony. We know even that many of them never became disengaged from this sort of domestic tie. The Demeter of Eleusis remained the special divinity of the family of the Eumolpidi. The Athene of the Acropolis of Athens belonged to the family of the Butati. The Patitii of Rome had a Hercules, and the Nautii a Minerva. It appears highly probable that the worship of Venus was for a long time limited to the family of the Julii, and that this goddess had no public worship at Rome. It happened, in the course of time, the divinity of a family having acquired a great prestige over the imaginations of men, and appearing powerful in proportion to the prosperity of this family, that a whole city wished to adopt him, and offer him public worship, to obtain his favors. This was the case with the Demeter of the Eumolpidi, the Athene of the Butati, and the Hercules of the Patitii. But when a family consented thus to share its god, it retained at least the priesthood. We may remark that the dignity of priest, for each god, was during a long time hereditary, and could not go out of a certain family. This is a vestige of a time when the god himself was the property of this family, when he protected it alone, and would be served only by it. We are correct, therefore, in saying that this second religion was at first in unison with the social condition of men. It was cradled in each family, and remained long bounded by this narrow horizon. But it lent itself more easily than the worship of the dead to the future progress of human association. Indeed, the ancestors, heroes, and manes were gods, who by their very nature could be adored only by a very small number of men, and who thus established a perpetual and impassable line of demarcation between families. The religion of the gods of nature was more comprehensive. No rigorous laws opposed the propagation of the worship of any of these gods. There was nothing in their nature that required them to be adored by one family only, and to repel the stranger. Finally, men must have come insensibly to perceive that the Jupiter of one family was really the same being or the same conception as the Jupiter of another, which they could never believe of two Lares, two ancestors, or two sacred fires. Let us add, that the morality of this new religion was different. It was not confined to teaching men family duties. Jupiter was the god of hospitality, in his name came strangers, suppliants, the venerable poor, those who were to be treated as brothers. All these gods often assumed the human form, and appeared among mortals, sometimes, indeed, to assist in their struggles and to take part in their combats, often, also, to enjoin concord, and to teach them to help each other. As this second religion continued to develop, society must have enlarged. Now, it is quite evident that this religion, feeble at first, afterwards assumed large proportions. In the beginning it was, so to speak, sheltered under the protection of its elder sister, near the domestic hearth. There the god had obtained a small place, a narrow cella, near and opposite to the venerated altar, in order that a little of the respect which men had for the sacred fire might be shared by him. Little by little, the god, gaining more authority over the soul, renounced this sort of guardianship, and left the domestic hearth. He had a dwelling of his own, and his own sacrifices. This dwelling,
Naos.
from
Naio.
to inhabit, was, moreover, built after the fashion of the ancient sanctuary. It was, as before, a cella opposite a hearth, but the cella was enlarged and embellished, and became a temple. The holy fire remained at the entrance of the god's house, but appeared very small by the side of this house. What had at first been the principal, had now become only an accessory. It ceased to be a god, and descended to the rank of the god's altar, an instrument for the sacrifice. Its office was to burn the flesh of the victim, and to carry the offering with men's prayers to the majestic divinity whose statue resided in the temple. When we see these temples rise and open their doors to the multitude of worshippers, we may be assured that human associations have become enlarged.